You're listening to On Shifting Ground from World Affairs and KQED. I'm Ray Suarez. Bethlehem is mentioned in prophecy. It's the place of Jesus' birth in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and it's where King Herod sends the wise men from the east to diligently search for the child. And according to the Gospel story, it's where they follow a star in search of a newborn king. Over these next couple of weeks, it will also be the place about which beloved Christmas carols are sung throughout the English-speaking world. But one place Christmas won't be coming this year is Bethlehem itself. This year, for the first time, Christmas has been canceled in the Holy Land, and heads of churches say it will be as long as war is raging in the Gaza Strip. There will be no sparkling lights, no lavishly decorated Christmas tree, and instead of a baby in the manger, a church in the West Bank city has placed Jesus and the nativity scene on a pile of rubble. This display of solidarity is the latest action from a delegation of Palestinian Christians. Earlier in December, they visited Washington to urge the Biden administration, legislators, and religious leaders to call for a full-scale ceasefire. Father Munther Isaac was a part of this delegation. He's an evangelical Lutheran pastor and the academic dean of Bethlehem Bible College. He joins us now from Bethlehem. Welcome to On Shifting Ground, Father.
Thank you.
And can I say Merry Christmas?
Yes, of course.
I guess it's not very merry there.
No, it's not. But we're still praying. We're still remembering the birth of Christ, but in very different circumstances.
Certainly, Christmas will arrive, but what will be different this year?
So to begin with, everyone feels sad. We're broken. We're lamenting. We're concerned about our loved ones in Gaza. Many in our congregations have relatives, direct relatives in Gaza that they fear for their lives. And at the same time, we are devastated by the number of civilians and children who were killed in this genocide that is taking place right now as we speak in Gaza. So the whole atmosphere, the whole mood, everyone feels down. And at the same time, Bethlehem itself right now is isolated from the world. We're under a strict siege from the Israeli military since October 7th. We have empty streets, especially in comparison to how Bethlehem looks like usually in December every year, with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, street decorations, a big Christmas tree, a Christmas market. All of these things are canceled this year, and the focus will be just on the prayers.
How was this decision made to formally say, we will not celebrate Christmas this year?
The formal decision came from a statement by all 13 heads of churches in Jerusalem. The patriarchs, the Orthodox and Catholics, and the other bishops. They recognize the severity of what's happening in Gaza. They recognize the mood that is in the people and how they feel, how we feel as churches right now, and as Christians and as people. They recognize it's not appropriate to do the typical Christmas lightings anyways. But to be honest, I mean, they didn't really have to make such a decision because no one was going to celebrate anyways. The fact that there is a formal statement from all heads of churches together underlines the magnitude of the catastrophe, the disaster that is happening right now in Gaza.
As a practical matter, would people even be able to get to the little town of Bethlehem, given the current conditions in the West Bank, if pilgrims had attempted to come? Is the area open for visitors, even absent this declaration?
They will have to go through a biblical experience like that of the Magi's, which is be stopped and interrogated. We're surrounded by checkpoints. We're surrounded by a wall. And right now, I'm having conversations with journalists who arrive at Jerusalem through flying to Tel Aviv, and then they can get to Bethlehem. And they have to go through multiple barriers, sometimes walk through a barrier just to get to Bethlehem. So you will be able to get to us, but not smoothly, certainly not through a direct ride.
As I thought about this in preparation to talk to you today, I wondered whether, still going ahead, with a holiday as a way of reminding the world not only of Bethlehem's place in the history of Christianity, but also reminding the world of the current conditions there, wouldn't have been also a valid approach to, obviously, a very tough time in the occupied lands.
Yes, and this is why we're moving on with the prayers, but without the typical festive accompanying the prayers, the celebrations themselves, and the parades in the streets that are typical of Bethlehem. And this is why we created this special manger in our church, the Lutheran Church of Jesus under the rubble, a manger of the Holy Family, a typical manger, but it stands on what resembles a bombed house in Gaza, to point to the reality here, to point to the severity of this war, this genocide. And I hope that you mentioned in the introduction how everyone thinks about Bethlehem. I wonder how many people know that Bethlehem is a real place today, with real people and with very, very challenging circumstances. I wonder when people think of Silent Night, they realize how not just noisy and hectic Bethlehem is right now, but how troublesome it is with incursions, with violence, and the violence of occupation itself. I don't think many people realize this. And I think we've created a mythical, maybe romantic view of Bethlehem and the Christmas narrative. If there is one silver lining from all of this mess we're in right now, this tragedy, I hope that people realize that this land desperately needs peace.
Let's talk a little bit about real, live, modern, 21st century Bethlehem. The Christian presence in Palestine is much reduced over the decades, a much smaller part of the population of Bethlehem. If people, after this terrible war is over, make their way there, what will they see? What kind of place is Bethlehem today?
Yeah, Bethlehem is a Palestinian town in which Christians and Muslims have been living side by side for hundreds of years. A town that right now, sadly, is too crowded, besieged by a wall. I think most people will be shocked by the images of the separation wall. But once inside Bethlehem, I think you will be immediately realize the generosity of the people, the hospitality of the Palestinian people, how much we love life, how much we have a very vibrant culture, society, definitely good food. I think this is something most visitors to Bethlehem leave with, the memory of the many, many good meals they've had and the good companies, the good conversations. If you come to Bethlehem and stay in a hotel and decide to leave the night for a walk, you probably end up in a coffee shop or even a house drinking tea or coffee and just having conversation with people. You'll be surprised how much people love to converse, usually about one of two things, either politics or religion. But as I said, beyond that, there is a strong culture. There is a very commitment to life, to thrive in the midst of a very difficult reality. And of course, you will encounter one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. Everyone comes to Bethlehem to visit the Nativity Church, and rightly so. And to me, this church is a witness not just to the maybe one of the greatest events in our Christian faith, the Incarnation, God becoming one of us here on earth, but it's also a witness to hundreds of years of an ongoing, non-stop Christian tradition. And I'm always in awe of this fact that prayer never ceased from this very same place for generations, for at least since the 3rd century.
You're a Lutheran. When I visited the Church of the Nativity, I was staying at the Lutheran hostel in Jerusalem. So I know that there's a long Lutheran presence in the Holy Land. Is it dwindling? Is the presence of the Anglican, the Lutheran, and other denominations among the Palestinian people a dwindling presence?
It is, not unlike other traditions. I mean, all Christians are leaving for several reasons, sadly. And not only that, I mean, even young Palestinian Muslims and Christians, they're all leaving at the same rate. opportunities are very, very limited right now, especially for young graduates, especially for people who are seeking their careers. Restrictions are also increasing right now, and everyone gets tired of life under occupation and decides to leave. So this is not something that is limited to the Christian community or to the Lutheran community. And certainly in my church, I feel it. I feel this wound that has been bleeding for years. I have many families in the church who we only have the parents, but we don't have the children. The children are somewhere else, either in the United States, in Australia, in Germany. This is a very worrying phenomenon. Most families here also encourage their children to seek a brighter future, a more secure future. They don't want their children to go through what they've gone through, whether the 1948 Nakba, many Lutherans, by the way, are refugees, or the constant uprisings, intifadas, or the Gaza wars that we've witnessed. And many families think we want our children to have a better future. So they encourage them to study outside and not to return. And I see this every Sunday in my church. I'm reminded of it every Sunday in my church with the presence of many folks without their children.
I know that the Christian churches throughout the Palestinian lands inside Israel proper, in Jerusalem, have strong links to American churches. What role does America play? It's a complicated one in Christianity in the Holy Land.
The relationship between the West and the Holy Land is certainly complicated, and it's a relationship between, we see in the West the resemblance of empires. Everybody wants to have not just a presence, but a share in the Holy Land. And over the years, we've seen many missionaries, many countries establish presence here. And yet our experience have taught us, it says that our opinion, our perspectives, and to a certain degree our existence is secondary to the interest of many Western Christians and American Christians, of course. In the sense, we're wondering if they prefer a Holy Land that turns into a museum. With the strong support that Israel enjoys among Christians in the United States, what we ask is, do these Christians who support Israel, most often unconditionally, realize that the policies of Israel are posing an existential threat on the Christian community? Do they realize that Israel as a state was established on the ruins of Palestinian homes and villages that include homes and villages of Palestinian Christians? This war in Gaza has confirmed what we already feared or felt, which is that our future, our perspectives, our reality is secondary to the interest of the Western world, their allegiance and loyalty to Israel. And even if it means ending, for example, as this war will certainly do, the Christian presence in Gaza, they wouldn't listen. Just before Advent, I carried a letter from all the churches in Bethlehem. We wrote it, we signed it, we sealed it, and I carried it, a physical letter, and I traveled to DC. And we had meetings at the White House with some staff who assured us that the letter will get to President Biden. And we said, we want a ceasefire. And we thought, everyone is going to think of Christmas now, of Bethlehem. And I was actually in DC the first day after Thanksgiving, and I was amazed by how much decoration, Christmas decoration, has already been there. And so you would think, and maybe we thought in our naivety, that they will take a letter from Palestinian Christians seriously. And they were courteous. They welcomed us in the White House. They've listened. We shared that we think this war is wrong, is dangerous, is unethical. It should stop. It's killing civilians. There are other ways. We want peace. Wars, siege cannot bring peace and security. We shared. But then a week later, the United States vetoed a UN resolution for a ceasefire. And I think this in itself confirms to us that what we think, what we call for, and it comes from our experience, we believe this war does pose a threat to us, is not taken seriously. by governments and in some cases Western churches.
Does the attitude of American Christians almost seem paradoxical to you, living in the West Bank, that while some denominations are calling for peace, others are absolutely steadfast in their support of Israel's military operation in Gaza?
Yeah, certainly. And to be honest, it's really hard for me as a Palestinian pastor to understand how pastors in the United States can justify any war, let alone this war, this genocide that has so far killed around 9,000 Palestinian children. It's hard for us to understand this. And I'm equally troubled by the lukewarm response of many mainline churches, the silence of some, and the lack of urgency of others to stop this genocide. I mean, we're baffled by the response of churches in the West. And of course, we're most distressed by those who, for example, called for Israel to turn Gaza into a parking lot. I'm talking about pastors. We'll also continue to be baffled, angry by very general statements that are made by politicians. I mean, take, for example, Mike Johnson, the newly chosen elected House Speaker, who said basically, as Christians, the Bible tells us we should support Israel. And I immediately ask, I mean, what about the context? What about if Israel commits war crimes? Should we support Israel? Should you support Israel? What if Israel is, attacking hospitals? Does that mean it's okay? Is there a limit to supporting Israel? And it seems there is no limit. And it seems also there is no nuanced understanding of the reality here. There is no grasp of the reality here. To be quite honest with you, I'm often shocked by the ignorance and lack of knowledge many American pastors have when it comes to what is happening on the ground. Yet they have very strong positions that as Christians we should support Israel. When we engage with conversations, not just on the Bible and what it means, does the Bible really say that? When we talk about conversation about simple things on the ground, I'm not talking about history of the conflict 101 or, we discover they have no clue what is happening here. And they have adopted a very simplistic opinion that they are willing to defend aggressively over the expense of Palestinian Christians, Palestinian children. And to me, this has to do with the credibility of our gospel witness. I mean, how can you do this? And this war on Gaza has magnified so many churches' positions. And we've heard, honestly, some horrible things that I would never hope or expect to hear from pastors.
Well, as we mentioned, there will be no pilgrimages. There'll be no big celebration for the world to see in Manger Square. In your own Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, what will Christmas be like?
Christmas will be like prayers of lament, of intercession. Christmas will be an opportunity to experience hope. Everything around us tells us that it's hopeless and we feel helpless. So in terms of what we're doing, we're coming to church to pray, whether on Christmas Eve or on Christmas Day. And this season, the fourth Sunday of Advent is on Christmas morning. So we'll be in church twice on Sunday and on Monday. And then on Saturday, we're doing a vigil for peace for Gaza. So we're definitely praying. We're definitely coming to church. And we're definitely searching for hope. And our hope is in the Son of Bethlehem, our countryman, the baby born in a cave here in Bethlehem. We see in him so much of the Palestinian story. He's been displaced. He had to endure, even before he was born, the Holy Family had to endure a difficult journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem because of a census decreed by the empire. He survived a massacre himself. When he was born, he became a refugee in Egypt. Yet against all odds, he came to Palestine. He came back and challenged authorities, challenged death itself, and was risen and brought life. In that Son of Bethlehem, in that baby born in a manger, we see hope. And so going back to the manger in the middle of our church with rubble and Jesus in the middle, my message is clear. It's from the midst of destruction, darkness, and death, we see a small ray of hope in the newborn child, just as we are relieved every time we see a baby being pulled from under the rubble alive. So we will come to pray, to lament what's happening, but also to search for hope. And I will be telling my folks, let us look to Jesus. Let us look to the Son of Bethlehem, the Savior, the Comforter. He's our hope in this dark season.
Well, I hope Bethlehem and all of that part of the world have a peaceful Christmas, and I hope you do the same. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
The Reverend Munther Isaac is the pastor of Bethlehem's Evangelical Lutheran Christian Church and the academic dean at Bethlehem Bible College. You're listening to On Shifting Ground, produced by World Affairs in San Francisco. After the break, why Ukraine's Orthodox Church has moved the date for its Christmas, and what breaking with this cherished habit means for Ukraine's fight against Russia. If you missed any part of this episode, or want to catch up on other international stories, download our podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. You're listening to On Shifting Ground from World Affairs and KQED. I'm Ray Suarez. Before Christianity, people in Eastern Europe celebrated the winter solstice with the ancient tradition known as Kolyada. In the dark of winter, these rituals and songs were thought to bring light in time for the coming new year. In Northern California, the Ukrainian women across generations are united by singing the Kolyadka, the songs of the Kolyada, as part of their Christmas celebrations.
You take many, many Eastern European countries, their music. You sing when you're happy, you sing when you're sad, you sing when you're sober, you sing when you're drunk. You sing. A lot of this Ukrainian song came from the tradition of paganism. Their traditions went with the land. The swallow said, I hope you have good harvest. I hope you have a good crop. I hope that your beautiful wife has black eyebrows. And so they had all of these things written down, and we followed them, and then they went into the song. Even today, we will go from house to house. We will say Dobry Večer Tobi, as we did today, and I will open the door and people will come in and they will sing Kolyada and I will join them and I will give them some wine and sweets and stuff like that. And that just goes on in many, many Ukrainian households. It's that song that has been around for 100 years. And it keeps us. It's my root. It's my root. We're very, very big on traditions, especially at a time when we're losing our country. You're hanging on to everything you can.
That was Nora Mason of the Ukrainian National Women's League of America's Northern California chapter. As the war approaches 2 years in duration, a second winter of peril has set in for the Ukrainians, and millions will be celebrating the holidays as refugees, and there's no end in sight. On December 14th, Russian President Vladimir Putin said his war would continue, quote, until Russia has completed its objectives. For the Ukrainians still living under the shadow of their eastern neighbor, the Russian invasion of 2022 has inspired a lot of conversation within Ukraine about everyday ways to break free from Russia's iron grip. Journalist and former UN official Bogdan Nahaylo joins us now via Skype from Kyiv. Welcome to On Shifting Ground.
It's a great pleasure to talk to you so far away.
Well, this is approaching the second Christmas under attack, under bombardment from Russia. How does it feel different from last year?
To be honest, there's more of a sense of gloom, pessimism. The courage is there, the fortitude and the resilience is there. But 2 years into a war, when there are doubts about support for Ukraine, both in terms of the deadlock in Congress, in terms of the Prime Minister of Hungary blocking EU aid in Europe, it's a gloomy period. Ukraine needs those weapons. It's not asking for boots on the ground, let alone Santa Claus's boots. It's saying, just give us the tools to do the job with. It can't do it itself. It wasn't prepared for that war, and it is fighting a power that considers itself the second biggest military force in the world. So, in Kyiv, to be very blunt, a heroic spirit, but it's more like darkest hours rather than finest hours. Finest hours, yes, heroism, but dark. Winter, cold, infrastructure being blown up, boys dying, lots of invalids and cripples on the streets, hurt by the war. Millions of people still outside of the country because of becoming refugees. I have to travel from Western Europe to Kyiv. It takes ages because there are no flights, remember? So you have to take a train from Poland or from Romania or elsewhere. Lots of women with their children, old age people. It's not just the bombing and the killing. It's that side of the human tragedy, the total dislocation caused by Moscow and the current Tsar there.
Well, it sounds like it's weighing very heavily as we approach the second anniversary of the invasion. One big difference, I understand, is that Christmas will arrive a little early this year for Ukrainians. It's part of a much larger story having to do with church politics and religious observance. Tell us about it. Why is Ukrainian Christmas now going to follow the Christian calendar used by Roman Catholics and other Christians around the world?
Well, in a nutshell, not to bore your listeners, as you know, in history, there were two major calendars in the Christian world. There was the old Julian one that Julius Caesar introduced some 40 years before the birth of Christ. And much, much later in the 16th century or so, Pope Gregory decided that the old calendar was about 11 days off, not accurate, wanted to revise it, bring it up to speed. There was a lot of resistance. People didn't understand. We didn't have mass media and radio stations informing people. And of course, a lot of people panicked, thought that they were having days taken away from their lives, that their lives were being cut short. There were even riots in Britain. But eventually, most of the Western world accepted this new Gregorian calendar, and Christmas remained on, in terms of the new calendar, on the 25th of December. However, the old calendar was still stuck to by most of the Orthodox Christians in Eastern Europe, who got their Christianity not via Rome, but when the split occurred with Constantinople, with Byzantium, with the Greeks, from Byzantium, as did the Ukrainians in 988. So they stuck with the old calendar, especially as Russia and Ukraine had been under Russian cultural and religious dominance until quite recently. But even the Greeks, for example, and the Bulgarians and others, they changed their calendar early in the 20th century. So right now, especially as the war's been going on, and since Russia has been trying to revive its imperialistic attitude and trying to not grab, but re-grab territory, political decisions were made to distance ourselves from Moscow and to emphasize that we are part of the rest of Europe, that we, if you want, a European child that was kidnapped in history by our neighbor, communist system, the Tsarist system, etc. I mean, Putin these days is even still denying in the 21st century the existence of a Ukrainian nation and claiming that most of Ukraine is Russia, regardless of what the Ukrainians think. Anyway, As a result of that, in 2017, the Ukrainian parliament, remember this is already several years after Russia had grabbed Crimea and part of eastern Ukraine, decided that they would switch eventually to recognizing Christmas on the 25th of December. It only happened this year because people are conservative in their religious views, and not everybody's keen to sort of forsake the traditions of their parents and grandparents and et cetera, et cetera. But already this has taken hold. And this last year, during this last year, both the Orthodox loyal to Ukraine, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, as opposed to those who are still under the sway and control of the Moscow Patriarchate, and the Ukrainian Greek Catholics, that's about a fifth of the population, mainly in Western Ukraine, they jointly decided that as of this year, Christmas will be celebrated on the 25th of December, not the 6th, 7th of January as before. And it's already happened because the big date for Christmas, symbolizing the coming of Christmas, was December 19th, St. Nicholas's Day, or Father Christmas Day, as in the West. So this year, for the first time, St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, Nikolaus, Klaus, Nicholas, that occurred on the 5th of December. That's already happened. So that's huge. The 19th would have been traditionally St. Nicholas Day, the day when kids get presents put under their pillows at night, and a magical Father Christmas, not dressed in red but with a white beard, but dressed as a bishop of the Greek church, would come during the night on his sleigh and bring presents.
So, Bogdan, is this a small thing, or really just another opportunity for Ukrainians to sever those remaining cords that connect them to Moscow?
It's a huge thing because, look, it's not just a political fight. It's not just about territory, sovereignty, independence, human rights, democracy. It's about a cultural patrimony and a self-identification. And so Ukraine wants to be part of Europe, the Western world, and America is, a forepost in that Western world. I mean, a vast majority until recently of your immigrants were from Europe. And so those traditions are very strong there. We identify with that. We don't want to be part of Eurasia, of a despotic Moscow rule, following in the traditions of the Tsars, the Commissars, the Brezhnevs and Lenins, and etc., and now the Putins. So yes, it's a huge break, but it was inevitable, and it has been precipitated by Russia itself. I guess things would have remained more or less the same had this aggression not occurred, and that part of the world would have said, okay, well, our traditions are different. We will celebrate on this day. You can celebrate in the West on that day. But now we're together, and I'm very happy, for example, that we are part of the Western community in terms of not just the Christmas spirit, but civilizational values and respect for human rights, democracy, and just decency, human decency, which should not just be limited, of course, to Europe, but if we start with ourselves, then we can be decent towards the rest of the world.
I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with Orthodox tradition, who don't understand the existence of national churches and a patriarch in Constantinople and all that very deep history, might not realize the significance of a Ukrainian church becoming, in Orthodox speak, autocephalous, running its own show, in effect. Was this something that caused a lot of conversation, a lot of controversy in Ukraine, or seen as a natural outgrowth of what was happening on the ground?
Autocephalous means with our own head, from the Greek. Cephalos is ancient Greek for head. Auto, our own. Look, the big split between Rome and Byzantium occurred early in the 11th century. They had their tensions, mainly political, then it became a religious issue over fairly minor things. But really, it was a split into East-West, who controlled which territories. The Ukrainians at that time, the Proto-Ukrainians in 988 and in the 11th century, they played it both ways. They accepted Christianity from Byzantium, but they kept their doors open to Rome. And for example, during the Cossack period, when there was an attempt by the Ukrainian Cossacks to reestablish a state based on their Kievan tradition, their first university, and indeed it was the first university outside of Greece, and Greece had fallen to the Turks already in 1453. In the early 17th century in Kiev, the Kiev Mohyla Academy, long before Moscow or St. Petersburg, anything had of its sort, it was a proto-university, this academy, and it taught both in Greek and in Latin. It was open to the West. Our tradition has always been knowing that we are straddling two worlds, East and West, that we're a borderland. And hence, the Russian Patriarchate, Moscow Patriarchate, only seized control of the Ukrainian church in the late 1600s, in the 1680s. Until then, we had nothing to do with Moscow, right? Moscow had declared itself, after they got rid of the Tatars and Mongols, 300 years of Mongol Tatar, shall we say, dominance, they proclaimed themselves the Third Rome, because Rome had sort of was dismissed, Latin. Constantinople, as I said, had fallen, Byzantium in 1453, and now suddenly they saw themselves as the monopolists in maintaining the Orthodox faith. In the 20th century, in all the brief interludes when Ukraine wanted to renew its independence, the first thing it did, apart from political proclamations, was to restore the Orthodox Church or to strengthen the Catholic Church in Western Ukraine. So that tradition has been very strong. And it was also there very prominently in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when Ukraine regained its independence, when the Soviet Union collapsed.
When churches split, when churches change their governance, there's often arguments about property and patrimony. Has a similar fight been set off in Ukraine, with some churches remaining aligned with Patriarch Kirill in Moscow and aligned with the Orthodox Church in Russia?
Yes, obviously. Well, Kirill is regarded as a war criminal or warmonger who blesses his troops going off to kill Ukrainians and to seize their property in churches. Look, the property issue, as you rightly point out, has been a major issue, not now simply, but already in the late 1980s, when Ukraine was reaffirming its desire to be independent. One of the first alarm bell ringers was the Moscow Patriarchate, because well over half of their profits were coming from parishes, mainly in Western Ukraine. Western Ukraine had been very strongly religious, Christian, but they had been Catholic, right? Greek Catholic, with their own right, not speaking Latin, if you want, Orthodox, but with loyalty to Rome. In 1946, one of the first things that the Soviets did when they recaptured this territory, it had been under Poland and Austria-Hungary before, was to ban the Ukrainian Catholic Church, drive it underground, and take over these parishes, which were very wealthy parishes, right? So even at the end of the Soviet period, the bulk of the profits and wealth that the Russian Orthodox Church had was coming from Ukraine. So it was not simply about religion. It was not even about politics. There was a lot of me, mine, give it back, let it not go, etc., etc. And that has been the case now also, as we've seen, you know, the two gems of Ukrainian Christianity are the Kiev cave monastery, the Lavra, right? The Russians dominated that even after Ukraine became independent, and have been very reluctant to leave it. They've been forced out, and they are being forced out, and the head of the Lavra is undergoing investigation for treason. And the other big Lavra in Western Ukraine, Pochayev, has just had its first service after 190 years in Ukrainian. I mean, where else would you see something like this? Can you imagine this happening in Ireland or in India or any countries that have been victims of imperial domination, to have been as tolerant as the Ukrainians have been for so long?
Is this all of a piece with other, let's say, assertions of Ukrainian nationhood, of Ukrainian distinctiveness? It's been widely reported that more Russian-speaking Ukrainians are learning the Ukrainian language, are dropping Russian in public. Can we understand this move to an earlier Christmas and an alignment with the Gregorian calendar as part of an overall reimagining or re-energizing of Ukrainian nationality?
Reinvention, if you want, yes. Look, you're quite right. Your questions are very good. You've obviously done your research. You know what the hotspots are and the controversial ones. But language, Ukraine has always been split, well, at least in the last 100 years, into Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers. Why? Because in 1933, 19th century, early 20th century, Ukrainian is banned as a language by the Russian Tsars. There's a resurgence in the early 20s. 1933, we have the Holodomor, the artificial famine, which kills anywhere between 4 to 7 million. Not Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers in the villages, the backbone of the nation. Russian migrants and others are brought in to do the industrial work, etc. Of course, the cities are Russified. And Ukrainian is regarded as a peasant language, second rate, all things Russian predominate, etc. So even now, today, the sense of national identity is not limited to Ukrainian speakers. I would even hazard to say, I would dare to say, that the majority of our lads dying on the front in the East are Russian speakers, and many ethnic Russians who have become loyal Ukrainian patriots. Cities like Mariupol, which have been flattened, they were Russian-speaking predominantly. They didn't welcome the Russians when they're Russian. You didn't see films of people going out with bread and salt, as in World War II, and welcoming Russian liberators, the oppressed Russian-speaking masses. It's not happened. And this, again, shows the hollowness of the claims by Putin that the Ukrainians have been somehow trying to suppress Russian speakers, that they're all Nazis, and they're the worst thing that's ever happened since Hitler. For us, Putin is the worst thing that's happened since Hitler. And it is in many ways, with this treatment of us as Untermensch and as people to be exterminated, maybe not directly in labor camps or in concentration camps, but destruction of cities, culture, etc. It's a worrying and very alarming situation at Christmas time, and it should affect not just Ukrainians and their immediate neighbors, but make other people in the world think about what is actually happening in the 21st century. How can this be happening?
During this conflict between branches of the Orthodox faith and the complicated struggle there, Ukraine has famously a Jewish president. Does he have to tread carefully as this plays out?
Not really. I think that Volodymyr Zelensky is a very modern person. Ukrainians stick to their religions, whether Orthodox or Catholic or Jewish faith or Crimean Tatar. We have a Muslim defense minister, for example. We had a Russian foreign minister, Klimkin, not so long ago. It's not cut and dry, black and white as Russia presents it. We are and have been developing into a political nation, not based on language, ethnicity, ethnographism of the 19th century. We are a modern, vibrant nation. And still in Kiev, you will hear maybe 50, 60% of the people speaking Russian, but they're highly patriotic. And maybe we're becoming a kind of a Belgium, if you want. Look at the Irish. How many people speak Gaelic? But tell them that they're English and, W.B. Yeats and company. So let's not think in terms of the narratives that Russia imposes on us. Russian speaking, they're ours. It's not like that. We live in a modern world, fast changing, with AI upon us and other stuff. So let's think in modern terms and not sort of give in to Russian narratives about religion, language, the old 19th century stereotypes.
You're listening to On Shifting Ground, produced by World Affairs in San Francisco. After the break, journalist Bogdan Mihailo describes Christmas in Kyiv. If you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on other international stories, download our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, has come under repeated attacks in recent weeks. The pressure remains heavy from Russia. For the most part, the air defense systems have done their work, and Kyiv is pretty well protected. I don't want to minimize the terrible losses and the terrible suffering that goes along with being under siege, but the air defense systems have worked generally pretty well. Can people, I don't know, relax that knot at the back of their neck, relax a little bit, enjoy this Christmas holiday? Can you go out and shop? Do you feel okay sending your kids out onto the street? What's Christmas going to be like? No matter what day it arrives, what's Christmas going to be like in Kyiv?
Look, Christmas in Kyiv is going to be a lot better than in the east or the south of the country because, as you say, it's well protected. But, for example, even cities like Odessa in the south, which the Russians have thought it was theirs with its formerly large Jewish population, etc., it's remained very loyal and Ukrainian. And there are a lot of missile strikes because the Russians are trying to destroy the port infrastructure. You know, Ukraine depends on, among other things, the export of grain. But in the south, and especially in the east, it's very unpredictable. You don't know whether it's a missile or an artillery shell is going to hit you. You don't know if your loved ones are alive, meaning the boys and the fathers who are at the front, or your wives and mothers who are refugees in Poland or Romania or wherever it is. So, as we know from history, Christmas is a time where we hope the spirit of Christmas, not even in a religious sense, but in the sense of human solidarity, the warmth of Christmas, the hope that it brings, that it will overcome these fears and the terror that still lurks whenever you hear a siren. And you know that it's like a needle in a haystack, the chances of that missile hitting you, but it unnerves you in the middle of the night or early morning or at work. Imagine running a newspaper like us with 30, 40 people, and 2 or 3 times a day the sirens go. What do? Do you go down into the basement, or do you sit it out and say, we've heard this so many times, and, existentially just sort of take it as it comes? I think a lot of people got very used to this terror in the air. But of course, if you have kids, older people, it is very frightening still.
What will people preparing a traditional Ukrainian holiday time feast be making a couple of days early this year? And can they get the ingredients?
That's a good question. I think in the big cities, they can still get the ingredients. Look, the tradition is on Christmas Eve, which used to be the 6th of January and now is the 24th. The traditional Ukrainian table was supposed to have 12 main dishes symbolizing the 12 apostles, right? No meat dishes on the Christmas Eve, lots of meat on the next day. And supposedly, theoretically, for the non-sinners, no alcohol also on Christmas Eve. And carol singers would come along. I was born in Britain, for example, in a provincial town outside of Birmingham, Wolverhampton. Even we had carol singers. I went as a carol singer on Christmas Eve to Ukrainian families. We had our church service early in the morning. The night before, we'd have our traditional dinner with the candles, with keeping an empty place at the table for those relatives who had passed on, but who were with us symbolically, keeping a wheat sheaf in the corner as a symbol of prosperity, with the father of the house giving each member of the family a piece of bread with honey on it, symbolizing life and prosperity, and etc. Many traditions. Of course, as in with Easter, not all of them are from the modern period, even the Christian ones. They're inherited even from the pagan ones. So Ukraine didn't become a Christian country until 988, as I've said, officially. So lots of pagan tradition that have become national traditions, lots of the folklore. Ukraine is very rich in carols. I mean, one of your most famous carols in the US is Carol of the Bells. That was brought to the US by a Ukrainian choir in the early 20s, the Koshets choir. So we have a rich singing tradition, which also becomes very amplified during the Christmas period, where there is any number of carols sung and special songs about St. Nicholas, Father Christmas for us, that comes before that. And then with the New Year as well. The Russians, the Soviets, tried to do away with that. They replaced St. Nicholas with a Father Frost, which was their response to Father Christmas, who also came with his Cinderella-like Urka, what we call her ice maiden, bringing presents, etc. But look, we've survived so long, and Christmas is not a time where we want to be thinking about killing people and even standing our own ground. If possible, it's a period for respite, taking stock of ourselves and our families, our country, thanking in particular all our supporters in other countries, in the US, in Europe, in the free world, who have stood by us, not let us down, and who do not forget us. It's a time also, it's our way of saying thank you and our Thanksgiving as well.
Bogdan Mihailo, I wish you a peaceful, quiet, and joyful Christmas.
Thank you very much, and thank you for showing interest in the plight of my countrymen and countrywomen, and thank you for your support and continuing interest.
Bogdan Mihailo is the chief editor of the Kyiv Post, and he joined us from the Ukrainian capital. And our thanks go to the Ukrainian National Women's League of America's Northern California chapter. You're listening to their rendition of Shchedryk, a traditional Ukrainian New Year's carol, which you might recognize as one of America's favorite Christmas songs. You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Elise Manukian, Sienna Barnes, and Andrew Stelzer, with research support from Adam Ailey. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Sport is our executive producer. Philip Yun is CEO of World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Happy holidays, everyone, and have a peaceful New Year.